The cold, rhythmic thumping of a heart against ribs at 3 in the morning is a sound most people only hear in moments of genuine peril. But for some, this physical alarm sounds in the middle of a perfectly safe, comfortable, and successful life. You have the career you worked for, a family that loves you, and a home that provides sanctuary, yet you wake up feeling like you are drowning in shallow water. It is a quiet, suffocating contradiction. The more reasons you have to be happy, the more guilty you feel for the tightness in your chest. This specific flavor of modern misery isn't usually caused by what is happening around you, but by the very structure of the mind itself. We often assume that if we just fix our circumstances, get the promotion, pay off the debt, or secure our children's future, the anxiety will finally evaporate. But here's the part most people miss. Anxiety is frequently a habit of the mind that persists regardless of how perfect life becomes. In fact, for many, a stable life actually provides the quiet space necessary for the mind to begin inventing new, imaginary catastrophes. 2,500 years ago, this psychological trap was identified and given a name. Ancient Buddhist scholars called it sankhara dukka. While we often translate dukka simply as suffering, that word is far too heavy and blunt for what is actually happening. A more accurate description is a misaligned wheel. Imagine a cart moving down a smooth road, but because one wheel is slightly off-center, every rotation creates a jarring, rhythmic jolt. The road is fine, the cart is expensive, but the ride is miserable because of the internal mechanics. Sankhara dukkha is the most subtle and pervasive form of this misalignment. It is the suffering of conditioned states, the anxiety that arises simply because we have a mind that is constantly processing, labeling, and worrying about the next moment. This is why the advice to just relax or look at how lucky you
often feels like an insult. It's because the person offering the advice is looking at the road, while you are the one feeling the jarring vibration of the wheel. That assumption sounds logical until you look closer at how our brains are wired for survival rather than satisfaction. Evolution didn't design us to be happy, it designed us to stay alive. To a primitive brain, a moment of peace was a moment of vulnerability. If you weren't worrying about the next predator or the next famine, you were at risk. Today, we have replaced predators with performance reviews and famine with social standing, but the machinery of the mind remains the same. It is an anxiety engine that needs fuel, and if your life doesn't provide real problems, the engine will start burning your imagination instead. Consider the story of someone like Priya, a woman who lived in the heart of San Francisco with every marker of a one life. She had the devoted husband, the healthy children, and the professional respect of her peers. To the outside world, she was the person others envied. But inside, Priya was a fraud. She spent her dinners calculating the probability of her son's failure and her nights rehearsing the words she would use if she were ever fired. She was physically present at the table, but her mind was 10 years in the future, mourning tragedies that hadn't even happened yet. This is where the risk quietly increases. When we live in this state of perpetual mental rehearsal, we stop actually living the life we are trying so hard to protect. We become like a person so obsessed with home security that they never actually step outside to enjoy the garden. Priya's husband would tell her that everything was fine, and her children would beg her to just be there with them, but their reassurance only deepened her shame. She felt broken because she couldn't appreciate the very things she was terrified of losing. The data doesn't fail, our interpretation does. We look at our lives and see stability, but our minds interpret that stability as a plateau before the fall. This leads to a constant state of hypervigilance. In psychology, this is often linked to an overactive amygdala, the brain's alarm system. When the amygdala is constantly firing, it doesn't matter how beautiful the view is, your body is telling you that the building is on fire. You cannot think your way out of a feeling that is being generated by your biology and reinforced by your habits. This is why the traditional approach to fixing anxiety often fails. We try to solve a spiritual and neurological misalignment with external achievements. We think, if I just get this one project done, I'll finally relax. But as soon as that project is finished, the mind immediately latches on to the next source of tension. It is a treadmill with no off switch. To find peace, we have to stop looking at the scenery outside the window and start looking at the glass itself, the mind through which we perceive everything. And this is why the advice sounds right, but can still be dangerous. People tell you to live in the moment, but for an anxious mind, the moment feels like a trap. If you aren't planning for the future, you feel irresponsible.
If you aren't ruminating on the past, you feel like you aren't learning. The mind convinces you that your suffering is a necessary tax you must pay for your success. It whispers that if you stop worrying, everything will fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very act of worrying is what is pulling the threads of your life apart? In Priya's case, her obsession with her son's success didn't make him more successful. It made him more distant. Her need to control every outcome didn't create security. It created a wall of silence between her and the people she loved most. She was trying to build a fortress, but she was accidentally building a prison. Understanding this requires us to confront an uncomfortable truth. We are often the
Architects of our own unrest. This isn't about blame, it's about agency. If the world is the cause of your suffering, you are a victim of circumstances you cannot control. But if the mind is the cause, then the mind is also the solution. However, this isn't a quick fix. You can't undo decades of mental conditioning with a single deep breath or a weekend retreat. It requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own thoughts. The first step in this journey is recognizing the 3 layers of dissatisfaction that the Buddhists identified. The first is obvious, the pain of a broken bone or the grief of a loss. The second is the pain of change, the realization that even good things are temporary. But it is the third, sankhara dukka, that is the most persistent. It is the background hum of the universe saying, not enough, not yet, what if? When you begin to see this hum for what it is, a byproduct of a restless mind rather than a reflection of reality, the power it holds over you begins to flicker. You start to realize that you don't have to believe everything you think. Most of our anxious thoughts are not news reports about the future. They are just weather patterns in the mind. They are clouds passing through a sky that remains vast and unaffected. But even with this knowledge, the habit remains strong. The brain is like a riverbed. The more a thought travels a certain path, the deeper that path becomes, and the harder it is for the water to flow any other way. To change the flow, you have to do more than just understand the map. You have to start moving the earth, one handful at a time. This is the work of mental training, and it is the only way to bridge the gap between the life you have and the peace you deserve. Moving the earth of our own habits begins with the realization that the mind is a terrible master, but a magnificent servant. For years, Priya had allowed her thoughts to dictate her reality, never realizing she could observe them without
joining them. This is the essence of the drunken monkey metaphor. Your mind will naturally swing from branch to branch, from the past to the future, fueled by the sting of its own insecurities. If you try to fight the monkey, you only make it more frantic. If you try to ignore it, it screams louder. The only way to find peace is to watch the monkey until it tires itself out, realizing that you are the tree, not the animal. This is where the practice of training the attention becomes a physiological necessity rather than a spiritual luxury. When we talk about neuroplasticity, we are talking about the brain's literal ability to change its physical structure based on where we place our focus. Research from institutions like Harvard has shown that consistent mindfulness doesn't just make you feel calmer, it actually shrinks the density of gray matter in the amygdala. You are physically deconstructing the alarm system that has been keeping you awake at 3 in the morning. At the same time, you are thickening the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic, emotional regulation, and perspective. But here's the part most people miss. This training feels like a failure for a long time before it feels like a success. When Priya first sat down to meditate, she didn't find Zen, she found a storm. She felt more anxious because she was finally noticing how loud her mind actually was. This is the meditator's paradox. You think you're getting worse because you're finally aware of how bad it's always been. But that awareness is the first crack in the prison wall. This is where the risk quietly increases of giving up too soon, assuming that because your mind won't stay still, you aren't good at it. The data doesn't fail, our interpretation does. Success in training the mind isn't the absence of thought, it is the speed of the return. Every time you realize your mind has wandered to your credit card bill or a conversation from 5 years ago, and you gently
bring it back to the present, you have performed the mental equivalent of a bicep curl. You are strengthening the muscle of the return. This is how you stop being kidnapped by your own anxiety. You might still feel the tug, but you no longer have to follow it into the dark. This transition requires a strategy of small, sustainable wins, which the Japanese call Kaizen. In a world obsessed with life hacks and overnight transformations, the idea of being just 1% better seems insignificant. But that assumption sounds logical until you look closer at the math of compounding interest. If you can be 1% more present during dinner today than you were yesterday, you are starting a chain reaction. You don't need to be a monk, you just need to be a slightly more attentive version of yourself. For Priya, the real test didn't happen on a meditation cushion. It happened in the hallway when her son held his future in an envelope. Her old self would have suffocated that moment with her own what-ifs, projecting her fear onto him under the guise of caring. But because she had been training, she saw the anxiety rise, recognized it as sankhara dukka, and chose not to act on it. She realized that her son didn't need her fear, he needed her presence. By stepping out of her own mental prison, she gave him the space to breathe. This is how the advice sounds right, but can still be dangerous if not practiced. Love without presence often feels like pressure. The domino effect of this change is profound. When you stop being a slave to your own internal unrest, the people around you begin to change as well. Anxiety is contagious, but so is groundedness. When Priya became lighter, her husband felt he could finally stop walking on eggshells. Her children felt they could finally be seen for who they were, not for how they might fail. Her life hadn't changed. Her career was still demanding, the bills still arrived, and the future was still uncertain. She was
finally home to live it. This leads us to the concept of ikigai, or your reason for being. Most of us think our purpose is a destination we reach in the future. But if your mind is always in the future, you are never actually in your purpose. Your ikigai isn't just the work you do. It is the quality of the consciousness you bring to that work and to the people you love. Training your mind to dissolve sankhara dukka is the highest form of service you can offer your family. You are giving them the gift of a parent, a partner, and a friend who is actually there. As you move forward, remember that the goal isn't to eliminate anxiety forever. Anxiety is a natural human response to a complex world. The goal is to change your relationship with it. You can learn to see your anxious thoughts as background noise, like the sound of traffic outside your window. It's there, but it doesn't have to stop the conversation happening inside the room. You can acknowledge the feeling of a tight chest without letting it convince you that your life is falling apart. This is where the journey becomes truly empowering. You are no longer waiting for the world to become perfect before you allow yourself to be happy. You are realizing that peace is a skill, not a circumstance. It is something you carry with you, regardless of the road you are traveling. The misaligned wheel of the mind can be trued, 1% at a time, through the simple, radical act of returning to the now. If you find yourself identifying with the anxious, successful person, know that your dissatisfaction is not a character flaw. It is a signal. It is your mind telling you that it is tired of running on a treadmill that leads nowhere. It is an invitation to stop building your life and start living it. The life you have spent so much time worrying about is happening right now, in the space between your breaths, in the eyes of the people sitting across from you, and in the quiet moments you usually ignore. You have the tools. You have the understanding of the invisible prison. And most importantly, you have the agency to begin the training. You don't have to be a victim of your own success, and you don't have to wait for the next crisis to start practicing presence. You can start today, in this very moment, by simply noticing the world as it is, rather than as your anxiety fears it might be. The road is smooth enough. It's time to fix the wheel. Would you like me to develop a specific 1% daily training plan based on these concepts to help you apply this to your own routine?